When people talk about war, they often imagine massive offensives, tanks rolling forward, jets screaming overhead. But most modern battles don't look like that anymore. Sometimes the difference between success and disaster comes down to something as simple and as deceptive as the weather. In late January, near the Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk, Russian forces thought they'd finally found their moment. A thick winter fog settled over the battlefield. Visibility dropped. Drones, Ukraine's biggest advantage, were supposed to be blinded. This was supposed to be the cover they needed. So they moved. Multiple assault groups. Vehicles instead of armor. Speed instead of protection. The idea was simple. Slip through the fog, overwhelm Ukrainian positions, and finally crack open Pokrovsk from the north and west. But here's the thing about fog. It doesn't just hide you from the enemy. It hides the enemy from you. And by the time the Russians realized that Ukrainian drones were still watching, still tracking, still striking, it was already over. What followed wasn't a battle so much as a collapse. In a single day, entire Russian assault groups were wiped out. Vehicles burned where they stopped. Survivors ran. Some surrendered. Some didn't make it far enough to matter. And that one day near Pokrovsk tells you almost everything you need to know about how this war is going right now. Let me walk you through what actually happened, step by step. The fog, the plan, and the first mistake. Pokrovsk has become one of those places that doesn't look important on a map until you understand what it represents. It's not just a city, it's a gateway. Control Pokrovsk, and you open routes deeper into Donetsk. Lose it, and the entire Russian timetable for the region starts to unravel. By the end of January, Russian commanders were clearly feeling the pressure. Deadlines had passed. Progress had slowed. Casualties were stacking up. And winter, which Russia has historically relied on, wasn't delivering the advantages they expected. But then came the fog. Heavy, low-hanging winter fog rolled across the area around Pokrovsk and the nearby settlement of Hryshyne. From a Russian perspective, this looked like opportunity. Ukrainian forces rely heavily on aerial reconnaissance, especially drones, to detect and destroy assault formations before they can even reach contact lines. Fog was supposed to neutralize that advantage. So the plan was set. Multiple assault groups would push forward at the same time. Not with tanks too slow, too visible, too vulnerable to drones, but with lighter vehicles, ATVs, motorcycles, even civilian cars. The idea was speed and dispersion. Get in fast, get close. Force Ukrainian troops into close quarters fighting where drones matter less. On paper, it wasn't completely irrational. In practice, it ignored one critical reality. Ukraine had already adapted. What Russian commanders either underestimated or didn't fully grasp was how deeply integrated Ukrainian drone warfare has become. These aren't just a few quadcopters in the air. They're layered systems, reconnaissance drones, FPV strike drones, bombing drones, all coordinated across units. One of the key units involved here was the Spartan National Guard Brigade, operating alongside adjacent Ukrainian formations. Working with them was the UAV unit known as the Birds of Magyar, led by Robert Brovdy, a group that has become infamous precisely because they specialize in hunting moving targets under difficult conditions. Fog doesn't shut drones down completely. It degrades vision. It complicates navigation. But it doesn't make drones blind, especially when operators already know where to look. As Russian assault groups moved forward, they weren't disappearing into empty space. They were moving through predictable routes. Open ground, sparse tree lines, narrow approaches between settlements. Fog or no fog, movement leaves patterns. And Ukrainian drones were already in the air. The first Russian vehicles didn't even make it close. FPV drones struck moving targets, igniting vehicles against the white backdrop of winter fields. ATVs flipped. Motorcycles vanished in fireballs. The fog that was meant to hide the assault instead amplified the confusion. Russian troops couldn't see what was hitting them or where the strikes were coming from. Once the first vehicles were destroyed, everything unraveled quickly. Some soldiers tried to dismount and scatter. Others kept pushing forward, hoping momentum would carry them through. It didn't. Ukrainian drone operators adjusted, tracking heat signatures, movement, and sound. Bomb-dropping drones followed, releasing explosives onto clustered troops trying to regroup. By the end of the engagement, nearly 4 Russian platoons had effectively ceased to exist. The Spartan Brigade would later state that around 90 Russian assault troops had been involved, with roughly 80 killed, several wounded, and a small number captured. 10 ATVs destroyed. Motorcycles gone. Civilian vehicles reduced to twisted wreckage. And that was only one part of the story. Because while this was happening near Pokrovsk itself, another Russian assault was unfolding just a few kilometers away, and it would end no better. Hryshyne. Why Russia can't let it go, and why it keeps failing. To understand why Russia keeps throwing men and equipment at Hryshyne, you have to look at the map the way military planners do. Hryshyne sits northwest of Pokrovsk. If Russia could take it, they wouldn't just gain a village, they'd gain leverage. It offers a potential launch point for attacks into Pokrovsk from a new direction, bypassing some of Ukraine's strongest defenses. More importantly, it threatens Ukrainian logistics. Routes running through and around Hryshyne are critical for moving troops, ammunition, and supplies into northern Pokrovsk. Cut those routes, and Ukraine's ability to hold the city becomes much more difficult. Russian command knew this. In fact, soldiers were reportedly told there was a deadline, January 1st, to take Hryshyne. That deadline came and went. Nothing changed. By January 31st, frustration had turned into urgency. That's when Russian forces attempted a mechanized assault on the village. This time, they brought armored vehicles, 3 units pushing forward together. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't cautious. It was an attempt to force progress where infiltration had failed. Ukrainian forces saw it coming. The 7th Airborne Assault Corps later explained that Ukrainian defenders detected the assault early. Units including the 155th Separate Mechanized Brigade coordinated to meet the attack, not inside the village, but on the approaches, the most exposed, most dangerous place for attackers. Open terrain between Hryshyne and Pokrovsk is a nightmare for assaulting troops. There's minimal cover. Few buildings. Tree lines are sparse and predictable. Any movement stands out, even in bad weather. The result was fast and decisive. Ukrainian fire destroyed 2 armored vehicles outright. More than 10 Russian soldiers were killed. The remaining attackers broke and fled, abandoning the assault entirely. What's telling is why this assault happened the way it did. According to Ukrainian reports, Russian commanders accelerated the mechanized attack because infiltration tactics, including those relying on fog, were no longer working. In other words, they were running out of options. And this is a pattern. January, as a whole, was brutal for Russian forces in the Pokrovsk direction. Assault after assault was detected early and neutralized. Ukraine's general staff would later report that by February 1st, around 80 Russian assaults in the area had been repelled. Pokrovsk, Hryshyne, Myrnohrad, Yampil, different locations. Same outcome. Russian units attempted to adapt, using ATVs during snowfall, motorcycles during fog, civilian vehicles when armor proved too vulnerable. But adaptation without protection is just improvisation under fire. And Ukraine kept finding answers. By late January, something else was becoming clear. Russia wasn't just failing to advance, it was bleeding strength. Why Pokrovsk has become a wall Russia can't break. Pokrovsk was supposed to fall months ago. That wasn't speculation, it was openly discussed in Russian planning circles. Capturing the city before winter would have been a major psychological and operational victory. When that didn't happen, Russian state media quietly shifted the narrative. In early December, Russia even claimed Pokrovsk had already fallen, right before a new round of peace discussions. The claim was false. Ukrainian forces were still there, still fighting, still controlling key parts of the city and its approaches. And they still are. One of the most revealing insights into the situation came from General Yevhen Lysychuk, commander of Ukraine's 7th Rapid Reaction Corps. Speaking in late January, he described a reality very different from Russian claims. Ukrainian positions, he explained, remain in the northern part of Pokrovsk. The actual line of combat is further out, along railways and building clusters in neighboring areas. Ukraine isn't clinging to the city by its fingertips. It's controlling the battlefield around it. More importantly, Lysychuk believes Russian forces in the region are nearing exhaustion. That doesn't mean Russia can't keep attacking. It means each attack costs more and achieves less. Assaults are smaller. Equipment is worse. Troops are less trained. Casualties hit harder. Ukrainian Brigadier General Oleg Apostle reinforced this point in a separate interview. According to him, Ukrainian forces win roughly 90% of close combat encounters near Pokrovsk, but most Russian assaults don't even make it that far. They're destroyed en route. Drones, artillery, coordinated fire. Even when Russian units manage limited success, slipping forward during fog, gaining a foothold, it rarely lasts. Ukrainian countermeasures eliminate those gains quickly. There is one important caveat. Ukraine can defend Pokrovsk. It can bleed Russian forces dry there. But launching a full counteroffensive to retake every contested area would require resources Ukraine doesn't currently have. So what exists now is a grinding stalemate, one that favors the defender. Every failed Russian assault reinforces that stalemate. Every destroyed platoon makes the next assault weaker. Every burned vehicle reduces Russia's ability to mass force. Pokrovsk isn't just holding. It's wearing Russia down. The bigger picture, why January 31st matters. January 31st wasn't just a bad day for Russia. It was a snapshot of a failing approach. Using fog as cover made sense once, but Ukraine adapted. Using ATVs and motorcycles made sense, until drones caught them anyway. Switching between infiltration and mechanized assaults only highlighted a deeper problem. Russia doesn't have a reliable method to break through. Open terrain, exhausted troops, limited armor, and Ukrainian air superiority at the tactical level have turned Pokrovsk into something far worse than a stronghold. It's a filter. Russian units go in. Few come out. And winter, the legendary ally Russia has relied on for generations, isn't saving them this time. If anything, it's accelerating losses through exposure, exhaustion, and logistical strain. What January 31st proved is simple. Even under poor visibility, even under pressure, Ukraine retains control of the battlefield dynamic. Russia can still attack, but it can't surprise. It can't overwhelm. And it can't sustain losses like these indefinitely. Pokrovsk still stands. And for now, that may be enough to decide everything that comes next.